Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. And this one I think you're going to find really interesting. We're going to be looking at the work of David Foster Wallace.
Oh, yeah.
Now, some people consider him a modern-day prophet.
hmm
So did his writing kind of foreshadow the world that we live in today? That's what we're here to find out.
I think so.
And our main source material that we're going to be going through is this BBC documentary transcript about Wallace's life and work.
Sounds good.
Are you ready to dive in?
Absolutely. Let's do it. David Foster Wallace, I mean, he was so insightful. He captured the anxieties of like the late 20th century, which is when he was writing.
Right.
But what I think is so remarkable is just how much of what he was writing about, it seems to anticipate the struggles that, we grapple with today in the 21st century.
It's a little spooky.
It is.
Yeah, it's almost like he had a crystal ball or something.
Yeah.
But before we get into his predictions and all of that, let's just give like a super quick overview of Wallace for anyone who might not be familiar with his work.
Okay, so David Foster Wallace, he was an American writer, super talented, but he was also troubled. He's known for his novels, his essays, short stories, and a lot of his work is very dense and complex. But like one of the key things to remember about him is his work really explored themes of isolation and entertainment and just the search for meaning in this world that we live in that's saturated with media.
Okay, so he was dealing with those themes like way back in the 80s and the 90s. Like he was living in our time now.
That's right.
That's wild. Okay, so to understand where these themes come from, I guess let's start with his childhood.
Okay.
What was his upbringing like?
So Wallace grew up in the Midwest in Illinois, and his parents were intellectuals. So his dad was a philosophy professor.
Wow.
And his mom was a grammarian.
No pressure.
No pressure at all.
Right.
But it's interesting because his sister Amy, actually, she said that growing up in the Midwest with like those grid-like towns
Yeah.
and those vast flat plains, it might have influenced Wallace's fascination with order and systems. It's almost like the landscape itself kind of instilled this idea of structure
Interesting.
in him. And we see this love of order in some interesting ways. So he was a nationally ranked junior tennis player.
Oh, wow.
And tennis, as you know, demands a lot of strategy and precision.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So there's that love of order again, right?
It's there.
Yeah, I'm noticing a pattern.
There's a pattern, but it's connected to a deeper struggle. Wallace battled with depression for most of his life,
Oh, wow.
starting in college.
Okay.
And this really, I think, influenced his writing.
That's really sad. Did that contribute at all to those darker themes that we were talking about?
I think so. It definitely played a part.
Yeah.
And his friend, a fellow writer, Mark Costello, he actually noted that a lot of Wallace's breakdowns, they were often followed by these huge breakthroughs in his writing. So it's like the darkness that he was experiencing, it fueled his creative genius.
That's heartbreaking, but I guess it kind of explains why his work is so raw and emotionally powerful. It's like he was wrestling with these huge existential questions on the page.
He was, exactly. And one of the questions that comes up a lot in his work is how we deal with this constant barrage of information and entertainment that surrounds us. Wallace, he was deeply concerned about the effects of popular culture, especially television. He was really fascinated by it, but also really worried about its power to consume us.
That's so interesting. He was worried about TV back when there were only a handful of channels.
I know.
I mean, that's pretty ahead of his time, wouldn't you say?
It is. I mean, think about it. He was writing at a time before the internet, before smartphones, before social media.
Right, right.
And yet he was already seeing the potential for technology and entertainment to really take over our lives. And in one BBC interview, he actually said that writers need to engage with popular culture because it's so pervasive, it's everywhere, and we often just consume it without even thinking.
Oh, that's so true. Okay, so he wasn't saying, TV's bad, don't watch it. He was just saying, hey, let's be aware of how it's affecting us.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Be mindful of what you're consuming.
Yeah, and that's pretty profound, I think.
Yeah.
So what did he see happening specifically? How did he actually explore this in his writing?
His most famous novel, Infinite Jest, tackles this head-on.
Oh, good.
It's set in this dystopian future where everything is commodified, even time itself.
What does that even mean?
So years are sponsored by corporations. So they have names like the Year of the Depend Adult Undergarment.
That's both hilarious and terrifying at the same time. But wait, is that really a prediction? I mean, we're not quite at the sponsored year stage yet, thankfully.
No, we're not. But think about it this way. How much advertising has really crept into our lives?
Oh, yeah, I guess.
I mean, think about product placement in movies and TV shows.
Yeah.
and sponsored content on social media. Like, it's everywhere.
You're not wrong.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not just about, like, literally sponsored years, right? It's about how consumerism has become this, like, inescapable force.
Yeah.
It's everywhere in our lives. Like, we're constantly being sold to, even in our leisure time.
That's right.
But what about the infinite jest part?
Right.
Where does that come in?
Well, that's the really scary part. At the heart of the novel, there's this fictional entertainment cartridge, right?
Uh-huh.
That's so captivating that it literally robs people of their will to do anything else. And so people, they become completely addicted to it. And it gets to the point where they waste away and die.
Wow. Okay, that took a dark turn. But is he really just talking about entertainment here? Or is there something deeper?
Remember those themes we talked about earlier? Isolation, the search for meaning?
Yeah.
Infinite Jest, I think, is really about the dangers of looking for fulfillment in these empty distractions, especially when the distractions themselves are designed to be addictive. Wallace saw how easy it was for us to lose ourselves in entertainment.
Yeah, I can see that.
You know, and how it can become this substitute for real connection and genuine experiences.
So it's not just about, like, predicting addictive video games or binge-worthy TV shows.
Right.
He's predicting this, like, larger societal trend, this tendency to search for meaning in the wrong places. It's like he's saying, don't let the infinite jest distract you from what really matters in life.
Exactly. And this is where I think his critique of irony comes in.
Okay.
He saw irony, which was originally supposed to be this tool of rebellion, becoming another form of detachment. So it's like we use irony to protect ourselves from being sincere, from being vulnerable. And in that BBC interview, he talks about how irony kind of protects us from appearing naive or sentimental.
Right.
You know? And it's like those are the worst things that you can be in modern society.
Yeah, yeah. I can see that. Okay, I think I'm starting to get a sense of his message here. He's not just observing these trends, he's warning us about them.
Yeah.
It's like he's saying, wake up, people. Don't let the media consume you. Don't let irony be your shield. Engage with the world, with each other, in a more authentic way.
Yeah.
And honestly, that message feels incredibly relevant today, even more so than maybe it did back then.
I think so too. And you know what? This is just the beginning.
Oh, there's more.
There's so much more to uncover in Wallace's work, especially, you know, his thoughts on postmodernism, and then also his unfinished novel, The Pale King.
All right, you've got me hooked. Let's dive deeper into those topics after a quick break.
Okay.
Okay, so we've established that David Foster Wallace was deeply concerned about the power of entertainment and our tendency to kind of hide behind irony.
No.
But where does postmodernism fit into all of this?
Oh, yeah.
I'll be honest, that term always makes my head spin a little.
Yeah, postmodernism, it is a really tricky concept to kind of pin down and define because it's this really broad term that encompasses a lot of different approaches in art, literature, and culture. But to put it simply, I guess we could say that it's a movement that emerged in the mid-20th century.
Okay.
And it was partly a reaction, I think, against traditional ways of thinking. And so postmodernists, they often play with language. They question these, like, established norms and embrace ambiguity.
Okay, that definitely helps. But where does Wallace fit into all of this? Was he like a card-carrying postmodernist? Or was he kind of pushing back against it?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And it's one that literary critics have been debating for years, really.
Yeah.
Some see him as this, like, quintessential postmodernist, while others believe that he was actually trying to move beyond its limitations.
What do you think?
I think he was walking a tightrope, really. You know, he definitely admired some postmodern writers like Don DeLillo, who very masterfully captured, I think, the complexity and the fragmentation of modern life in his work. But Wallace also saw the potential pitfalls of postmodernism,
Okay.
especially its tendency towards, you know, irony and detachment.
So he was using the tools of postmodernism, but trying to inject something, I don't know, more genuine, more heartfelt into his work.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. You know, he was grappling with these huge questions about meaning and connection, and he didn't want to get, like, bogged down in irony and intellectual games.
Yeah.
He wanted to reach people on an emotional level.
And that makes sense, considering his own struggles with depression and isolation. It's natural that those would find their way into his writing.
Absolutely. And one of the ways that he tried to, like, bridge the gap between intellect and emotion was through his use of what we call self-referentiality.
Okay.
So he would often break the fourth wall in his writing, like directly addressing the reader or commenting on the act of writing itself.
Could you give me an example of that? I'm not quite picturing what that looks like on the page.
Sure. So think of those moments when you're reading a book and a character will suddenly turn to you and say, You know what I mean?
Right.
It's jarring, right?
Yeah.
It pulls you out of the story and makes you very aware that you're reading this constructed narrative.
Right.
And Wallace, he does this a lot in his work.
So he's intentionally, like, disrupting the flow of the story. But what's the point of doing that? Is it just like a literary gimmick?
It's more than a gimmick, I think. It's really a way of kind of exploring the nature of consciousness, you know?
Yeah.
The way our minds constantly loop back on themselves.
Yeah.
Second-guessing, analyzing everything.
It's like he's saying, hey, I'm just as lost and confused as you are. We're all in this together.
Exactly. He's inviting the reader to participate in the struggle, to acknowledge the messiness of being human. And I think this is what makes his work so relatable. Even when it's challenging or experimental, he's not afraid to show his own vulnerability. And by doing so, he creates this space for the reader to be vulnerable too.
Now, we can't talk about David Foster Wallace without mentioning his unfinished novel, The Pale King.
Right.
I know it was published after his death, but it's become this kind of cult classic among his fans.
Yeah. The Pale King, it's fascinating because it really tackles a subject that most writers would probably just avoid altogether. Boredom.
Boredom.
Yeah. And the setting for this book is an IRS tax processing center.
Oh, wow.
In the 1980s.
Okay.
So it's all about paperwork, routines, and just this kind of mind-numbing tedium.
Wait, he wrote a novel about taxes
Yeah.
and boredom. I mean, that doesn't sound very entertaining.
I know, right? But that's what was so genius about Wallace. He could take these seemingly mundane things and make them profound. He even told his editor that he was writing a book about accounting and boredom.
No way. He really said that.
He did.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah.
He was always pushing the boundaries of what literature could be, what subjects it could tackle.
Yeah, and The Pale King is no exception. He was exploring this idea that even in the most mind-numbing tasks, even when we're just like bored out of our minds, there's still potential for meaning, for connection, for something greater than ourselves. He was really interested in this idea of quiet heroism in everyday life.
So it's not really about taxes at all, is it? It's about the human condition, the search for meaning in a world that often feels empty and meaningless.
Exactly. And in a way, The Pale King kind of brings together all the major themes that we've been talking about, you know?
Yeah.
Isolation, entertainment, the search for meaning, the struggle with boredom and depression.
Yeah.
It's like a culmination of his life's work, even though it was never finished.
It's almost tragic, isn't it, that he was working on this book, this exploration of boredom and meaning, right up until his death. It's like he was trying to find a way out of the darkness, but never quite made it.
It is tragic, but
Yeah.
the good news is that his work lives on. And it continues to resonate with readers, I think, because it really grapples with these universal human struggles. And that's actually what we'll explore in the last part of our deep dive, the enduring relevance of David Foster Wallace's work, even in our world today, that's so chaotic and technology-driven.
Okay, I'm ready to hear more about that. Let's dig in. So we've spent this deep dive really exploring David Foster Wallace's work, from his fascination with systems and structure to his, I guess you could say, almost fear of empty entertainment, all the way to that unfinished grapple with boredom in The Pale King.
Yeah.
But here's a question that's been swirling in my mind this whole time. What makes his work so relevant today? I mean, even decades after his death.
You know, that's the thing about Wallace that I think is just so fascinating, right? He was writing in a time like way before the internet really exploded.
Right.
Before smartphones became like these extensions of ourselves. Before, you know, we were all living in the attention economy.
Yeah.
And yet he seemed to predict so much of what we're experiencing right now.
It's like he was this cultural Nostradamus.
Yeah.
Seeing like the digital age coming and warning us about all the potential pitfalls.
Yeah.
So what do you think he'd say about our world today?
Oh, man.
You know, about our obsession with social media, our shrinking attention spans, our constant need for stimulation and distraction.
Oh, I think he would be both fascinated and horrified. Remember how concerned he was about television?
Yeah.
And how it kind of numbs us and disconnects us from like real experience?
Yeah.
Imagine what he would say about the endless scroll of social media, the algorithms that are literally designed to keep us hooked.
It's like the Infinite Jest has become a reality.
It really has.
Except it's not one single entertainment cartridge. It's this vast digital landscape that's just vying for our attention every second of the day.
It is. And, you know, I think he would be especially concerned about the impact of all of this on our ability to, like, really authentically connect with each other. He was already worried about, you know, irony and detachment
Right.
becoming our default mode of communication. Right.
Imagine what he would have to say about the performative nature of social media,
Oh, yeah.
where, everything is so filtered and polished, and vulnerability is often seen as a weakness.
Yeah, he was really urging us to embrace sincerity, to risk being quote unquote naive or sentimental
Right.
in a world that often seems to value, cynicism and detachment. And honestly, it just feels like his message is even more urgent now than it was then.
It does.
But is it all doom and gloom?
Hmm.
Did he offer any solutions, any hope for, navigating this increasingly complex world?
Well, I don't know if he offered solutions, but I do think that his work offers a path.
Okay.
Remember his fascination with systems?
Yeah.
And how much he loved tennis. He understood the need for structure and discipline.
Right.
But he also saw the beauty in the unexpected,
Mm-hmm.
in those little moments of grace that can kind of disrupt our carefully constructed routines. So it's not about rejecting technology or entertainment altogether.
No.
It's about being mindful of how we engage with it, about setting boundaries, about cultivating a sense of presence in a world that's constantly trying to pull us away from ourselves.
Exactly. And I think The Pale King, even in its unfinished state, offers a really powerful lesson here. It's about finding meaning in the mundane,
Yeah.
about embracing the boredom, the discomfort, the things that are just inherent to the human experience.
It's like he's saying, don't run from the hard stuff.
Yeah.
Lean into it. That's where the real growth happens.
Right.
That's where you find connection. That's where you discover who you truly are.
I love that. I think you hit the nail on the head.
So for our listeners, what's the takeaway here? What can we learn from David Foster Wallace that will help us navigate this, increasingly complex and kind of overwhelming world?
Well, I think his work offers a few key insights. The first is be mindful of the infinite jest in your own life.
Okay.
What are the distractions that are keeping you from really engaging with the world in a meaningful way?
Yeah.
The second is don't be afraid to be sincere. Be vulnerable. Embrace those moments of genuine connection, even if they feel a little awkward or uncomfortable at first.
Yeah.
And finally, remember that meaning can be found in the most unexpected places.
It's a powerful message. And honestly, I think it's one that we all need to hear. David Foster Wallace may have left us too soon, but his work continues to challenge us, to inspire us, and to remind us of the importance of living a life that is both meaningful and authentic.
Yeah, so keep searching for those moments of connection, those glimpses of meaning, even in the midst of all the chaos of everyday life. Keep asking the tough questions, and don't be afraid to embrace the full spectrum of human experience.
That's a beautiful thought to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the mind of David Foster Wallace. We hope you'll continue to explore his work and discover your own insights along the way.